Welcome to episode 18 in the Deeper into Isaiah series, and this is a really exciting episode talking all about God versus the idols. Right now we're in the middle of the European Cup Championship, and it's really exciting because you've got one team against each other. They are, if you like, against each other, they're versus each other. You can see when it's written up there, it's going to be England versus Italy. That's going to be exciting. Depending on which side you're following, doesn't really matter. But the point is that you've got a competition going on. And this episode is all about God versus the idols. God against the idols. We're going to cover quite a few chapters, but it's going to be a wonderful time as we step into God's Word. Just reminding ourselves where we are and where we've been. So we're in book 2 of Isaiah's trilogy of books. We're in the book that's all about the exile in Babylon. And we recall that the people of Judah are in captivity in the nation of Babylon. And they've been taken there because they went against God, because they sinned against God. And the cry of their heart is, Lord, how long? And can you rescue us? And can you bring us back? And in his mercy, God is going to say, yes, absolutely. I can and will bring you back. Last time out, we talked about hope for heavy hearts, those wonderful verses that will have been on our hearts and on our minds from the book of Isaiah. Comfort my people, raised up on eagle's wings. When you pass through the waters, I will be there and you will not be covered over and you will not be burned. And that God is our refuge all the way through. And we heard how God is there. And the question really is, does God still love us? And the answer came emphatically, yes. But then the question comes, is God strong enough to rescue us? And God says in those chapters, chapter 40 particularly, don't you know who I am? I'm the everlasting God. I'm the creator of the ends of the earth. I don't get tired or weary. I'm strong enough to rescue you. Yes, said the people. But there's a bit of a problem here. Because you're telling us you're strong enough to rescue. But the gods of Babylon appear to be stronger. If you are strong, if you are capable of rescuing us, if you can step in and sort out this situation, then how is it that Babylon has taken us into captivity? Surely that means that their gods are stronger. Perhaps it is that God didn't know. Maybe Jehovah just hadn't noticed. Or maybe it is that the gods of Babylon are stronger. You'll recall that the Assyrians made exactly that claim when they got to the gates of Jerusalem. And as they shouted out across the walls of Jerusalem, did the gods of any other nation save them? Who do you think that you are, that you can be saved? And of course, when Hezekiah lays it out before the Lord and prays before God, then God wonderfully answers and demonstrates himself to be stronger. So it's no surprise that the people of Judah, while they were in exile in Babylon, might have said to themselves, God, are you strong enough? Are you powerful enough to rescue us? This is the subject matter of this talk. When we talk about gods, we talk about idols. One of the questions that comes to us is really, why are we talking about idols in Western civilization when, of course, we've gone beyond that, haven't we? And we're more sophisticated than to believe in other gods. The question comes up, surely there are no idols in the West. I want to define an idol. An idol is anything that stands in the place of the one true God. Anything that comes in place in front of the one true God. And what do we mean by that? We mean at least 3 things. First of all, we mean worship. That is your heart devotion. What is it that you give your heart to? Secondly, what do you follow and obey? In other words, what are your attitudes? What are your actions? What controls the way that you behave? And thirdly, what do you honour? In other words, what do you give your time, your money, and your energy to? And actually, when we start to unpack that, we discover that Western civilization has a lot of gods. What do people worship, follow, cherish and honour? I've listed some up here. You can probably think of some others. But these are the gods of Western civilization. The god of self. I can do what I want. I'm in charge of my own life. I can run my own affairs. The fact that of saying your truth is not my truth. I'm entitled to my own beliefs. I have rights. There's nothing wrong with having rights, but when we start stamping on them and claiming that our rights is what defines us, then this in fact is the god of self. And the god of self is rampant in Western society. We have many gods in the West. This leads on to the god of pleasure. If it's all about me and what I want to do, then why should I not do what makes me feel good? I do what feels good to me. And you might have heard this kind of thing said, it doesn't matter what I do as long as it doesn't hurt somebody else. It's a mantra that many people live by in Western civilization. As long as it doesn't hurt somebody, I'm free to do whatever I want. And this is an anti-Christian statement. Paul says those who live in this way are slaves to sin. They are slaves to pleasure. They are slaves to themselves. They're not free at all. They're enslaved by it. And in fact, when we discover that when we live for pleasure, that there aren't any moral consequences to our actions, then it ends up in addiction. It ends up in moral destitution. It ends up in a conscience that's seared. There are consequences. The third God I've identified here is wealth. It's all about what you have, what you earn, what you acquire, having the latest whatever it is, and showing that you are rich enough to do so. The richest is the winner. Then there's the God of power, which is subtly different from wealth, you see, because power says, I don't really care for the money. I just want to be in charge, not just of me, but of others. And that makes me feel good. Did you know that our politicians are paid way, way, way less than the leaders and captains of industry? So why do they do it? In fact, you will find that retired politicians go on to have very much more lucrative careers afterwards. So why do they go into politics? They did it for the power. Because they liked the feeling of power. It was intoxicating to them. Now, money is fine, but power is better. When I control others, it enhances me and makes me feel good about me. These are our gods. The things that we worship, we pour devotion into, that we cherish, that we pour time and money into, that control the way that we live, our attitudes and our behaviours. There's the God of security. This is a massive God within Western civilization, so little thought about and talked about, and yet prevalent and rife within the Christian church. That is the thing. I don't want to be rich. I just want to be comfortable. I don't want to have great pleasure. Oh no, I realise that's very, very wrong. I don't want to give myself up to all kinds of pleasures, but I do want to provide for myself and my family, make sure we're secure and healthy into old age. And I better save for my pension because that will look after me. My pension will save me. This is a God. It's an idol. God says there is one God that you can rely on, and it's me. And you can't rely on the fact that you ran 5 miles every day so that you'll be healthy into old age. And you can't rely on the fact that you saved up enough so that you'll be comfortable once the mortgage is paid off. The only one you can rely on is me. And when we realise this, it changes our behaviours. It changes our devotion. It changes our attitudes. It changes our move and what we do with our time and our energy and our money. It suddenly becomes an all-encompassing way of life. You see, this is what worship of a God is all about. And finally, fame. The fame thing says it's all about me, and not just I want to do what I want to do. That's the self thing. But fame says I want everyone else to see me and to know me and to see I'm important. It's all about me. Look at me. We've reached an incredible time, haven't we, in the 21st century, where people are famous for being famous. Before this decade, an influencer was unheard of. People famous for being famous. Fame says, what's the point of being rich if no one knows who you are? Could you name the 10 richest people in the world? You probably couldn't. Could you name the prime ministers of the 10 top countries, the G7, the G8 countries in the world? Probably not. But you could name the famous people, the movie stars, the rock stars, the people famous for being famous, as we've talked about. I want people to worship me, says fame. And as we're talking through this, you're probably thinking, do you know what, Steve, this is not that significant, surely, is it? 100% it is. We have to take these gods seriously. Not one of us as God's people would ever think of bowing down before a Hindu god, a Hindu image. We'd be appalled by the idea even of going into a Muslim mosque and bowing down in front of what we know to be a false god. And yet, every single day, God's people bow down in front of these idols and more of our Western civilization. And I want us to grab hold of ourselves and say, okay, I'm going to take it seriously. These things are just as damaging as the ancient idols of Babylon, perhaps more so, because we are being lulled into a false sense of security that these things can save us and that they're worth our investment, and they are not. Why does Isaiah get so wound up about idols, and what's his point? He wants to tell us that it is foolish to trust idols, that it is foolish to trust idols. First off, he begins with this point. Idols are ineffective, so it's foolish to trust them. I'm going to read a longer passage from the chapter 41 of Isaiah, but some of the words appear here on the screen, and you'll see them as they come up. Present your case, says the Lord. Set forth your argument, says Jacob's king. Tell us, you idols, what is going to happen. Tell us what the former things were so that we can consider them, or know their final outcome, or declare to us the things to come. Tell us what the future holds so that we may know that you are God. Do something, whether good or bad, so that we will be dismayed and filled with fear. But you are less than nothing. Your works are utterly worthless. Whoever chooses you is detestable. I have stirred up one from the north, and he comes, one from the rising sun who calls on my name. He treads on rulers as if they were mortar, as if he were a potter treading the clay. Who told of this from the beginning so that we could know, or beforehand so that he could say, he was right? No one told of this, no one foretold it, no one heard any words from you. I was the first to tell Zion, look, here they are. I gave to Jerusalem a messenger of good news. I look, but there's no one among the gods to give counsel, no one to give answer when I ask them. See, they are all false. Their deeds amount to nothing. Their images are but wind and confusion. God's got a powerful thing to say about the idols. He says basically idols are ineffective. They can't do anything. He says, I call and things happen. He's about to tell us that he's going to call someone called Cyrus, who's way into the future. He's hundreds of years from Isaiah, and he's probably 50 to 70 years away from the events that are being talked about here, even prophetically. And Isaiah names him specifically. I call Cyrus by name, says God. I can do things. I can bring things about, but these idols can actually do nothing. What's more, says God, I can tell you about it before it even happens. I mean, that's fantastic. That is incredible, isn't it? I can tell you about it before it even happens. Not only am I strong enough to do it, but I'm also wise enough to know it. These idols, they give the impression of being powerful, but they can't actually help. They give the impression of being capable, of being knowledgeable, but in fact, they know nothing. In contrast, God both knows and can do. So the idols are ineffective. It's foolish to trust them. Here's another amazing thing that Isaiah says. Idols are man-made, so it's foolish to trust them. This is something that's self-evident when you think about it. I want to read you again a long passage from Isaiah. The reason I'm going to read it is it brings it out so amazingly, so beautifully about the way that idols are created. Listen to these words. Some of them will appear on the screen as you come up. The blacksmith takes a tool and he works it with coals. He shapes an idol with hammers. He forges it with the might of his arm. He gets hungry and loses his strength. He drinks no water and he grows faint. The carpenter measures with a line, makes an outline with a marker. He roughs it out with chisels and he marks it with compasses. He shapes it into a human form in all its glory, that it may dwell in a shrine. They're making an idol, you see. He cut down cedars, maybe a cypress or an oak. He let it grow among the trees of the forest. See the time that's required. Planted a pine, the rain made it grow. It's used as fuel for burning. Some of it he takes and warms himself and kindles a fire and bakes bread. But he also fashions a god and worships it and makes an idol and bows down to it. Half of the wood he burns in the fire. It's literally that useless to him. He burns it in the fire, and over it he prepares his meal and roasts his meal and he eats his fill, and he warms himself and says, I'm warm, I see the fire. From the rest he makes a god, his idol, and he bows down to it and worships, and he prays to it and says, save me, you are my God. I read it all because it's so unbelievable, it's so jaw-dropping. The time and effort and energy that goes into making this idol that is absolutely useless. Made beautifully, carved out, gold and preciousness all around it, the best wood and the precious metals that are hammered out around it. And half of this is used for this wonderful ornate purpose. And the other half is thrown on the fire and burned up in order to feed the needs of a human being. Isaiah says this is extraordinary. They know nothing. They understand nothing. Their eyes are plastered over so that they cannot see. Reminiscent of Isaiah 6, God says, you're going to go and speak to these people, but they're not going to see. You're going to tell them, see, and they won't believe. And hearing, they won't listen to me. Their minds are closed, they cannot understand. No one stops to think. No one in our society stops to think. These gods that we have trusted, these things that we have put first, half of it I use for myself. I baked bread over his coals, I roasted meat and I ate it. Shall I make a detestable thing from what is left? Shall I bow down to a block of wood? Such a person feeds on ashes. A deluded heart misleads him. He cannot save himself. You see, this is what the idols of our Western society are like. They are man-made. The idol of self. I'm relying on me. When you think about it for long enough and realise that there are 7 billion people in the world and I'm trying to rely on me, people more powerful than me, people stronger than me, people richer than me, people who've got more influence than me, so I'm trying to rely on me. The foolishness of it. It's a self-made God. Pleasure that only lasts for the time that the pleasure lasts and is gone, and it doesn't satisfy, and I'm relying on that to feed my soul spiritually. Wealth that can disappear. How many stories have you read about people who won it all and then lost it all? Lottery winners are absolutely famous for it. The money pours into their bank accounts and disappears, leaving them poverty-stricken. Power, which only lasts as long until somebody stronger deposes you. I think back to communism and the Cold War, and how almost overnight the power of the Eastern Bloc fell. Security, which can be taken in a moment. And a pandemic swept across our country, and many people who were secure found that they were no longer secure. Their jobs gone, their livelihoods in tatters. And fame, which is passing. Someone famous today is forgotten tomorrow. As you're listening and watching this right now, do you know who's number one in the UK charts? And do you know who was number one when this was recorded? And do you know who was number one 10 years ago? Fame is fickle. And so says Isaiah, doesn't anyone stop to think that these gods that we have made for ourselves are so ineffective? Half of it feeds us and helps us and supports us, and the other half we're trying to rely on and call out to and say, this is the thing that I'm pushing my energy into. And God says to them, this is foolishness. Idols are man-made, so it is foolish to trust them. But God is the first and the last. He established anything. He is the creator. This is what the Lord says. Israel's King and Redeemer, the Lord Almighty, I am the first and the last. Apart from me there is no God. Who then is like me? Let him proclaim it. Let him declare it out and lay it out before. Since I established my ancient people, I can tell you what's to come. Don't let them foretell what will come. Do not tremble. Don't be afraid. Did I not proclaim this and foretell it long ago? You are my witnesses. Is there any God besides me? No, there is no rock. There is no other rock. I know not one. When we find ourselves settled upon God alone, we find ourselves in a secure, stable, and happy place for all eternity. He is the one who we should worship, pour out our heart's devotion. He is the one who we should cherish, who we should pour out our time, our energy, and our money towards. And he is the one who we should honour and obey as we change in our behaviours and our attitudes to fall in line with who he is. Idols are man-made. I call on my own heart now and tell myself it's foolish to trust them. Idols cannot protect you, so it's foolish to trust them. Isaiah says in chapter 45, truly you're a God who has been hiding himself, the God and Saviour of Israel, almost like a game of hide and seek. God has been hiding himself. What does he mean? Well, you see, it looked like God didn't know. And it looked like God wasn't strong enough because Babylon had won and Babylon had taken him into captivity. Truly you are a God who's hiding himself. Sometimes it's felt like that in my life. Something awful has come around and it felt like God wasn't even there. But all the time he was walking with me, step by step by step, as necessary, carrying me. And the ultimate end is what we're looking to. We are looking at a long game, folks. We are playing the long game as Christians. We don't look to the immediate. We don't look to the right now. We look to what God is going to do into eternity forever and ever. These 70, 80, maybe 90, perhaps even 100 years are nothing compared with the eternity that stretches out before us. And when eternity is taken into account, all the makers of idols will be put to shame and disgraced. But God's true people will be saved by the Lord with an eternal salvation, who will never be put to shame or disgraced, to ages everlasting. That's the key line, to ages everlasting. God says idols cannot protect you in the long term. When it comes to eternal things, they are utterly useless to protect you. And so trust in me, says God, because I can protect you. I can care for you. I'll carry you. And finally, idols are heavy to carry. Idols are heavy to carry, so it's foolish to trust them. Here's two of the idols, two of the gods from Babylon, Bel and Nebo. Bel bows down, Nebo stoops low. You see, what's happening is that people would bow down before these gods, but Isaiah turns it entirely around. These idols have to bow down. Why? Because they have to be carried about. They can't walk for themselves, they can't move for themselves, they can't do for themselves. Their idols are borne about by beasts of burden. The images are carried about and they're burdensome and they're heavy for those who carry them. And we discover that our idols are heavy for us when we carry them. I discover that as I try to rely on anything that's not God, it is a weight upon me. The worry of will I lose my money, the concern about will I keep my job, the worry about does everybody know who I am. The self-esteem issues in this world are massive. How can that be when we focus more on self than ever before, and yet self-esteem is at an all-time low, whereby people are even hurting themselves, damaging themselves and committing suicide over it? It's extraordinary. These gods that we thought were so important to us are in fact heavy burdens that we carry. They lift it on their shoulders, they carry it, they set it in place, and there it stands. On that spot it cannot move. When someone cries out to it, it can't answer. It can't save them from their troubles. You see, God says, don't believe in these idols, don't trust in them, don't place your faith in those things that are not me. In fact, what you discover, they're not just neutral. They are bad for you. And sometimes as God's people, we have this opinion, because the idols of this world have come into our hearts, we have this opinion that they're sort of neutral, and they're not. They're a heavy burden to carry on our souls. God says this, listen to me, you descendants of Jacob, all you remnant of the people of Israel, you whom I have upheld since birth, and have carried since you were born. God says the idols, you've got to carry them, but I carry you. I carry you from the very first day, even to your old age and grey hairs. I am he who will sustain you. I've made you. I will carry you. I will sustain you. I will rescue you. Do you know what I've discovered? Is that this verse from Isaiah, so well known, comes home to my heart more and more as I consider this truth. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you. When I start to trust in idols, with things that are not God, all the things we've talked about, I get nervous, I get worried, I get concerned, my own heart starts to fret. But when I rely on the Lord and trust in the Lord, that perfect peace is what floods in. That calm of knowing that He is carrying me, that we are working together for His kingdom and for His good. God upholds His people. He lifts us. He carries us. God versus the idols. Well, in this competition, the winner is clear. Worshipping, following, desiring, honouring idols feels so much easier on the surface. It demands so much less of us. It's just so easy to slide into idol worship, isn't it, as we think about those idols that we've talked about over and again. But in reality, the effect on our lives is damaging, numbing, or indifference. All of these are quick or slow ways to ruin your spiritual life. God calls us once again to say, come on, love me, be devoted to me. Give of your time, your money, yourself to me. Give of your attitudes and your actions to me. Actively remove those idols from your life. I'm going to call us right now. Let's be real serious before God. Let's agree together as God's people. Let's covenant together as God's people to remove those idols, to actively seek out and remove those idols from our lives and to replace them with the worship, devotion and honour of our one true God who loves us so much and carries us for all time and eternity.